I remember being a kid, sitting in an audience and watching a speaker speak and thinking, what would it take to be so capable, to be able to stand up there and share insight with so many people? As a 10-year-old kid struggling to remember my steps to long division, just the thought of, remembering information and sharing it in an hour's time eloquently seemed like an impossible feat. But as impossible as it seemed, just the honor of knowing that someone asked me to speak in front of others was motivation enough for me to do the things I needed to do to one day be given that privilege. What's interesting is 2 years into public speaking, I realized my aspirations were actually wrong. You see, it's not what you know that matters. What matters is using what you know to help others do greater things than you've ever done. And when you get this opportunity, whether it's speak in front of a large audience or even a small audience of 3 people, this represents a unique opportunity for you to share that insight so that it has impact with them, and that impact transcends or has lasting effects on that person's life. Now, the reality is most of our experiences, look like this. Right? And so we might think that, this opportunity to, speak in front of others requires a special talent. Perhaps you have to be an astronaut and have accomplished some great feat or won multiple, medals in the Olympics, or have to be charismatic enough, or maybe have that presenter's gene to be given that privilege. Well, the reality is that the art of sharing knowledge is reserved for everybody, and anybody and everybody has the opportunity to do it and to do it well. In fact, I want to share with you this data that came out this past year in 2017. And this organization called the OECD, and basically this organization collects data and statistics from countries all around the world and data from their countries. And one of the variables that they look at is learning, and student learning and adult learning. And in this particular piece of data, they were looking at students' performance in science. So these are 15-year-olds. And the other piece that they looked at was how much time these students spend learning inside and outside of school. So on the bottom here, you see time learning inside and outside school. And on the side here, you see what their performance was. Now, what's interesting is that when you take a look at how countries compare, and the average is about 45 hours spent per week. What you start seeing is that there's certain countries where kids are spending a really long time studying, yet they're some of the worst performers. And of course, there are countries where kids spend a lot of time studying and it's some of the best performers. But the interesting group is this one, where they're spending some of the least amount of time studying, yet they're the highest performers. Now, what this tells us is countries like Finland, Germany, Netherlands, Canada, Japan, what they've done is they've figured out how to systemically, within their system, get a mass group of people doing learning or different efficiencies or strategies of how to share information so that it sticks and it has impact in these students. And so what this tells us is that it is possible to get a mass group of people with a variety of different skills and abilities to have that skill and to have that ability. And so when you take insight, from these different countries, or you take insight from the research, I'll boil it down to one simple thing. One thing that if you keep in your mind and you practice it and do it consistently and do it consistently well, you'll have a significant impact on your audience. And that's this concept of getting your audience active. You see, active both, mentally thinking, getting their mind going, active in the sense of emotionally, right? Getting emotions involved, or actively in the concept of physically, like physically doing something. And there's certain, examples and strategies that you can use that are very simple to slightly modify the way that you share information so that it has more impact. So for example, instead of, telling people an answer, have them predict it, right? Before you get to the next slide, ask them to try to guess what you're going to share in the next slide. That gets their mind going and thinking about your content. Another thing you do is, have them reflect on an emotional event or story in their life, right? Have them think back, right? So get their mind going, but also it gets their heart going, right? Because it'll be something that's very deep and personal to them. And that'll create a connection between the content that you're sharing and this deep emotional story that resides in their lives. Another strategy you can use, it's very simple, is just ask them a question and have them turn to the person beside them and in a minute or 2 minutes, share and discuss that concept. This gets your audience actively involved in participating and thinking. You might even see people take out pencils or papers or their phones to share a picture, right? Gets them actively involved during your presentation. The other thing you can do is, leverage technology and have the audience physically contribute content or generate the content that make up your slides. Right here, you see, there's a group of 200 Spanish officials, and they were sharing, insights and things that they wanted for their kids. So I connected an emotional story in their lives, and I wanted them to get active and share that with the group. And then I used their words, I used their language as my content. So create this really strong connection that would hopefully be memorable for them beyond my time with them. And now sometimes, if you think of this concept of getting your audience active involved, it requires you to physically shift the environment, if you can, of the people presenting. So here's an example. This is several months earlier, where I walked into a room, and this is what I was going to present. And before I started presenting, I transformed the room to look something more like this. Because you see, what I wanted to do is not have the focus be on me, but have the focus be on them. And I wanted to make sure I created multiple opportunities they would be discussing and interacting with the people beside them. And so I physically changed the layout so that it was more conducive to that. Now, if you have the luxury, give them opportunities to physically get up, right? To go and walk around and interact with other people, right? And, to physically interact with content, both digitally or non-digitally, and have connections with people during your session. And so there it is, right? So one simple thing to remember is get your audience actively involved, whether it's mentally, emotionally, or even physically. Now, if you want to go deeper on this, there's tons of experts in this space that can even help you fine tune this craft. Here's some of my favorites. This is Dr. Carmen Simon. And what she does is she uses brain science, right? She has this. She co-founded this organization called Multimedia. You can follow the link in the description below. And basically what they use is brain science to help you make your presentations and your content way more stickier. Right? And there's a lot that they've learned in the research to help you do that. Or these guys, Chip and Dan Heath, who spent years, studying why is it that some ideas, are sticky and other ideas, just fade away. Think of Halloween and that story of the kid who found that razor in that apple. That story is so sticky and so many people remember it. But why is it other stories just kind of fade away in their memory? Well, they went through and they looked at what do all these sticky stories have in common, and they came up with a summary of what the common elements were. And if you're working in a digital space and if you're watching this, it's a perfect example. A lot of us now share information through webinars, or perhaps we pre-record our content. A study that was done, probably one of the largest, on these MOOCs, massively open online courses. So they took, millions of students who have watched these courses, and they watched a variety of different ways, whether it was a lecture in the front of the room, or whether it was, just a talking head, or perhaps it was kind of like Khan Academy, where they physically saw someone writing content on the screen, kind of like what you're doing here. Or just a static presentation of content with the words kind of in the background. And what they did is they observed, which videos, did students stick through the most, and then there was assessments that kids had to do. So how did their students, I should say, they were adults as well participating in this, how did they perform on these assessments, and who performed better? And did it matter, what type of delivery? And in fact, it did, right? They saw differences in the type of delivery. You can follow a link to the research below. Or these other researchers, Fiorella and Mayer, who basically had this instructor memorize a script and then have the exact same image represented. They had different groups of people come in, and basically they're teaching the Doppler effect, and they varied how it was delivered. So some just talked to static content on the screen. Others she had them gesture. And with others, physically wrote down content. And with another one, used things like Apple TV or screen sharing, and they just saw kind of digital content being shared on the screen. And what they noticed is there were actually differences in how the audience not only remembered, but was able to apply that newly learned information into new contexts. And the presence of people and the physical gesturing and inking was actually something that mattered. And so, there's no shortage of insight and knowledge out there about, what it takes to help make a sharing of knowledge more impactful in the audience people out in front of us. Yet you and I both know that the majority of our experiences look like this, right? It's a talking head with some images of PowerPoint in the background, otherwise known as death by PowerPoint. And the question is, how do we get to more of this active learning and these concepts that we know help make our messages more memorable? And the answer to that is, well, it's difficult because we're human and we like to do what we're used to. And so if you think for a moment, here's a quick, example of it. If you cross your arms, you'll notice that either your right arm is over your left arm or your left arm is over your right. And if you go ahead and try to do it the other way around, right? So if you have right over left, try left over right. What you'll notice is that it's very awkward, right? It's very uncomfortable to do it that opposite way. But if I had you practice that for the next 5 minutes, you'll notice it'll get easier. But here's the interesting thing. If I bumped into you a week from now and asked you to cross your arms, how do you think you'll cross them? Right? You'll cross them the same way that you're used to, that your default, the way that you kind of don't have to think about it, your natural way of doing it. And that's exactly the challenge, right? For many years, think back to experiences. What have you experienced when people are sharing knowledge with you? It looks something like this, right? It was probably very infrequent where someone got you to actively involve and get engaged, both mentally, emotionally, physically, with your content. And so by the time it's your turn to get up on stage and share information with people, guess what you do, right? You do what you're used to. And that's exactly the challenge. It takes time and effort to go against the grain, right? And requires a lot of us, to help others experience something different. That's going to help that change. But here's 5 things that you can do, right? Because I want to help you make that change. And yes, it's uncomfortable and awkward, but here's 5 things that you can do when you're doing your presentations that'll help you make that transformation and be on your way of helping others and have more impact. Now, the first is, it's really important, is try to answer the question why. Like, why would you want to do something? Why would you want to change your delivery method or the strategy with your share knowledge, right? What is it for you? For me, it was, I'm in education and I know this insight about what helps make, messages more memorable and sticky. And I want to model that. I don't want to be a hypocrite when I get on stage saying one thing and doing another. Right? So find out what your why is. Now, the next thing is go ahead and do it, right? So create your presentation, however you're used to doing it, whether it's you write a script out or you put your slides down, but just don't make it pretty, right? So just get the core down. Just don't spend time making it pretty. Because the next thing you need to do is the hard part, which is I want you to write down just 3 to 5 concepts from all of your entire deck. Just pick 3 to 5 concepts. And the way you're going to pick these is by asking, if my audience leaves and all they remember is these 3 things, right? All they remember is these 3 things. I know it'll have a significant impact in their work, in their life, and what they do. What are those 3 things that you want to make sure they walk away with? And the next thing you're going to do is you're going to work on strategies and be creative here, right? On how can you make those concepts stick with them by engaging them in an active process, both mentally, emotionally, actively. Right? And then what I want you to do is I want you to, take note when you're presenting of what are the times where your audience really lit up and they really kind of connected to what you're presenting. If you need to, grab a camera and record yourself and then watch the recording and take note of the times in your presentation when the audience is really kind of sticking to your presentation, to your content. There's no doubt in my mind, that if you practice this and you do this on an ongoing basis, sure, it'll be awkward and uncomfortable at first. Before you know it, more and more people will be thanking you for the insight that they gained and for the impact that you've had on their lives. Now, I can't let you go without really helping you sink this in. And so I'm going to have this little experiment for you to trial. What I want you to do is pick 3 people in your lives. It could be your friends, could be your family, it could be, coworkers. And what I want you to do is I want you to send them one of 3 links, right? So randomly assign those people to one of the 3 links, and the links are just below here in the description. And a week later, I want you to, message them again and ask them, what did you remember from that link I sent you? And I want you to take note of the level of detail that the people were able to describe to you based on which one of these links you sent them. And if you're curious enough, go ahead and watch some of these other links, go to these other links and experience a different way of receiving information. And go ahead in the comments, I'd love it if you could do it in the comments of this video below here, is let me know what your experience was. And in that way we can share with each other what we come to learn and understand about the art of sharing knowledge.